The silver blade hidden in my garter felt like ice against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the heat radiating from the man in the bed. I was sent to end the reign of the Alpha King, Kaelin the Merciless. But as I stepped into his private chambers, the moon shifted and the air thickened with a scent that made my blood sing. He wasn't just my target. He was much more. The Obsidian Palace did not just house the Alpha King, it breathed with his malice. Every stone was cold, every hallway felt like the throat of a beast waiting to swallow the weak. I didn't come here to find a soulmate or to be saved. I didn't come here for mercy. I came here to be the end of a bloodline. I entered through the servants' gate at the break of dawn, disguised as a girl broken by the very wars Kaelin had started. They called me Lara. To the guards, I was just more meat for the grinder, another nameless girl meant to scrub the blood of their enemies from the floors. I kept my head down, not out of submission, but to hide the white-hot rage burning in my eyes. Every time a guard growled at me or made a crude remark, I didn't flinch. I simply visualized exactly where I would slide my blade into his throat when the time came. The kitchens were a chaotic hell of steam, iron, and the smell of raw meat. It was a factory designed to fuel an army of monsters. I spent hours hauling heavy crates of root vegetables and scouring thick grease from massive, blackened cauldrons. My hands were raw, and my back ached with a dull, throbbing heat, but I welcomed the pain. It kept my mind sharp. It kept my anger simmering at the perfect temperature. "Faster, you useless pup," the head cook screamed, throwing a wet rag at my head. I caught it before it hit my face, my reflexes nearly betraying me. I forced my muscles to relax, forcing myself back into the role of a clumsy peasant. I squeezed the rag until the dirty water ran over my knuckles like blood. Patience, I told myself. Patience is the weapon that kills kings. Suddenly, the frantic clatter of the kitchen died. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was an instant, suffocating drop in sound, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. The only sound left was the steady, rhythmic thud of heavy boots on stone. Kaelin. He didn't announce his arrival. He didn't need to. His presence felt like a mountain shadow falling over a valley. I didn't look up from my scrubbing, but I could see his heavy black leather boots as he strode across the floor. He stopped just feet away from me. The power radiating off him was nauseating, a mixture of ancient magic and raw, physical dominance. "You," Kaelin's voice rasped. It was a sound like grinding stone, deep, cold, and utterly demanding. My grip tightened on the wooden brush until the wood began to groan. He wasn't talking to me. He was standing over a young perimeter guard who had been waiting by the service door to deliver a report. The boy couldn't have been more than 19, his face pale and sweating. "Alpha, the southern borders are," the guard started, his voice cracking. Before the man could finish the sentence, Kaelin's hand was a blur of motion. He seized the guard by the front of his uniform, hauling him upward with a single hand until the boy was dangling on his tiptoes, gasping for air. "The southern borders are compromised because you are a coward," Kaelin hissed. His voice wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the stone floor and into my very bones. "I smelled the scent of a rival scout on your jacket. You didn't hunt him down. You didn't tear his heart out. You let him bleed and crawl back to his master with my secrets. I thought he was just a scavenger, Alpha." "Mercy. Mercy is a disease that kills packs," Kaelin growled. He didn't strike the man, he simply let him go with a shove so powerful it sent the guard crashing into a table of silver platters. The sound of shattering metal was deafening in the silent kitchen. The guard lay on the floor, trembling, too terrified to even groan. "Strip him of his rank," Kaelin commanded, looking at the head of security. "Toss him into the forest without a coat or a blade. If I see him within my walls by sunset, feed him to the hounds piece by piece." Kaelin stood there for a moment, his chest heaving slightly under his black tunic. I could feel his gaze scanning the room like a searchlight, looking for the next sign of weakness. I gripped my scrubbing brush so hard my knuckles turned white, my heart thumping a steady, heavy rhythm of pure, unadulterated hatred. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to lung across the grease-slicked floor, pull the silver dagger from my garter, and drive it through his arrogant, cold heart. I wanted to watch the light leave those icy blue eyes. His boots pivoted. He turned toward my corner. I felt his eyes on the back of my neck, a cold, prickling sensation that made the hair on my arms stand up. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink down to just the two of us. I didn't tremble. I didn't breathe. I just waited, my fingers itching for the kill. He lingered, his nostrils flaring slightly. He was a wolf, he could smell fear, he could smell lust, and he could smell lies. I forced myself to think of nothing but the cold water in my bucket. I buried my scent under the smell of lye and old grease. He let out a sharp exhale of contempt, as if disgusted by the very presence of such lowly servants, and walked out without another word. I didn't let out a sigh of relief. I didn't feel a connection. I just looked at the doorway where he had vanished, my jaw set so tight it hurt. He was a tyrant, a brute who ruled by breaking everyone around him. He thought he was a god among wolves. Soon, I thought, returning my brush to the water with a violent splash. Soon, I'll show you that even gods can bleed. The rumors spread through the kitchens like a wildfire before the morning bread was even out of the oven. The Alpha King's personal attendant, the one who had served him for 3 years, had been carried out of the palace in a shroud. She hadn't been killed by Kaelin's hand, but by the sheer, crushing weight of his presence. Some said she went mad from the silence, others whispered that she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. In the Obsidian Palace, being the personal maid to the Alpha was considered a death sentence. I sat on a wooden bench, nursing a cup of thin, bitter tea, listening to the other maids sob and whisper. They were terrified. They knew that today, the head housekeeper, a woman named Mistress Vane who had a face like cracked leather, would choose a replacement. It'll be one of us, a girl named Mira whimpered, her hands shaking so hard her tea spilled onto her lap. He'll snap our necks if the water is too cold. Or worse, he'll turn us into one of those mindless husks that roam the lower levels. I didn't say anything. I stared into my cup, watching the dark leaves swirl. My heart wasn't racing with fear. It was racing with anticipation. If I stayed in the kitchens, I was just a ghost in the background. I could wait months for a chance to get near Kaelin. But as his personal attendant? I would be in his shadow. I would be in his bedroom. I would be at his throat. The heavy oak doors of the servants' hall swung open. Mistress Vane stepped in, followed by 2 guards whose silver-tipped spears glinted in the torchlight. The room went silent. You could hear the frantic breathing of 20 terrified women. Vane's eyes, sharp and cold as flint, scanned the row of us. She walked slowly, her heels clicking on the stone floor like a countdown. She stopped in front of Mira, who let out a strangled sob. Vane moved on. She stopped in front of a girl who had been at the palace for years. Vane shook her head. Then, she stopped in front of me. I didn't look down. I didn't tremble. I stared straight ahead, my face a mask of dull, peasant-like indifference. But inside, I was a coiled spring. You, Vane said, her voice echoing in the hall. Lara, isn't it? Yes, mistress, I replied. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor she was clearly looking for. Vane leaned in, her scent hitting me. Lavender and old parchment. She peered into my eyes, searching for the crack in my armor. You didn't flinch when the Alpha entered the kitchen yesterday. I watched you. You kept scrubbing while others were falling over themselves in terror. Why? I calculated my response. I couldn't sound too smart, but I couldn't sound like a coward either. I have work to do, mistress. A hungry stomach doesn't care about a king's temper. The other maids gasped. Mira pulled away from me as if I were already a corpse. A slow, predatory smile spread across Mistress Vane's face. It wasn't a kind look. Brave. Or perhaps just incredibly stupid. Either way, you're exactly what we need. Someone who won't faint every time he growls. She turned to the guards. Take her to the East Wing. Clean her up. Dress her in the black silk. She starts tonight. The walk to the East Wing felt like a funeral procession. The guards marched behind me, their heavy boots a constant reminder that there was no turning back. As we passed through the servants' quarters, the other maids stopped what they were doing to watch me go. I saw pity in their eyes. Some of them even crossed themselves, offering a silent prayer for my soul. They thought I was walking to my grave. I knew I was walking to my victory. I was taken to a small, windowless room where two older women stripped me of my soot-stained rags. They scrubbed my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the smell of the kitchens. They brushed my hair until it shone like a raven's wing. Then, they brought out the uniform. It wasn't the rough wool of a kitchen maid. It was thin, charcoal-colored silk that clung to my body. It was designed to be silent. No rustling fabric, no heavy buttons. In the Alpha's wing, sound was an enemy. He wanted his servants to be ghosts. They handed me a small silver tray with a crystal decanter of mountain water and a single glass. Listen to me, girl, one of the women whispered, her eyes wide with warning. Do not speak unless he speaks to you. Do not look him in the eye. If he is angry, stand perfectly still. Do not run. If you run, his wolf will see you as prey. Do you understand? I nodded, my fingers tightening around the edge of the tray. I didn't need her advice. I knew exactly how to handle a predator. I was led up the grand staircase, past the ornate tapestries and the snarling statues of great wolves, until we reached the highest floor of the palace. The air here was different. It was thin, cold, and smelled of mountain air and something darker, something ancient. The guards stopped at a set of massive iron-bound doors. They didn't open them. They just looked at me, their expressions unreadable. He's inside, one of them said. Don't make a sound. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the silver dagger hidden against my thigh. The cold metal was a comfort. I wasn't just a maid. I was a shadow with a blade. I pushed the doors open. The room was vast, lit only by the flickering glow of a massive fireplace. The walls were lined with books and weapons. And there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over his kingdom, was Kalen. He was shirtless, his back to me. His skin was a map of scars. Deep gouges from claws, jagged lines from blades, and a strange, glowing mark between his shoulder blades that seemed to pulse with a faint, amber light. He didn't turn around. He didn't move. But I knew he knew I was there. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with his heartbeat. You're late, he said. The sound of his voice sent a jolt through me, but it wasn't fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. I was in his chamber. I was behind his back. I walked forward, my silk slippers making no sound on the heavy rugs. I set the tray down on a low table with a deliberate, steady hand. Mistress Vane sent me, Alpha, I said, my voice low and steady. Kalen turned slowly. The firelight played across the hard angles of his face, casting long shadows. His blue eyes were like ice, boring into mine. He didn't look at the water. He didn't look at the tray. He looked at me. He stepped closer, his presence expanding until it filled every inch of the room. He stopped so close I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. He leaned down, his nostrils flaring as he took in my scent. I held my breath, my hand twitching toward my thigh. My heart was a hammer, but my eyes were steady. I hated him. I hated everything he stood for. And in this moment, I realized that killing him wouldn't just be a mission. It would be a pleasure. You don't smell like the others, he whispered, his voice a low growl that vibrated in my chest. You don't smell like fear. Fear is a waste of time, Alpha, I replied, refusing to blink. His eyes narrowed, a flash of something, curiosity? Anger, crossing his face. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering just inches from my throat. We shall see, Lara, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. We shall see how long that lasts. I stood my ground, the fire of my hatred burning brighter than the hearth behind him. The selection was over. The game had begun. And only one of us was going to survive it. By the end of the first week, my life had narrowed down to the dimensions of the Alpha's private wing. I was no longer a part of the world below. I didn't see the sun rise over the courtyard, and I didn't hear the gossip of the kitchens. I was a ghost haunting a king's shadow. Mistress Vane had made it official, I was no longer a general maid. I was Kaelin's exclusive attendant. To the rest of the palace, I was a dead woman walking. To me, I was a spy who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. Every morning, I entered his chambers before the first light hit the peaks of the Obsidian Mountains. Every evening, I was the last thing he saw before he closed his eyes. I served his meals, I ironed his tunics, and I stood in the corner of his study while he met with his generals. They ignored me. They saw a girl in black silk, a piece of furniture that breathed. They didn't see the way my eyes tracked every map on his table. They didn't see me counting the seconds it took for the guards to rotate at his door. They didn't see me memorizing the exact weight of his armor. I was gathering information, piece by piece, like a mosaic of his death. The wine, Lara, Kaelin said without looking up. He was sitting at his heavy oak desk, surrounded by scrolls that detailed pack movements and supply lines. I stepped forward, the silver tray balanced perfectly on my palm. I poured the dark, blood-red liquid into a crystal glass. My hand was steady, but my mind was racing. I watched the way his fingers gripped the pen. He had a slight tremor in his right hand, an old injury, perhaps? I noted it. A weakness. I watched the way he tilted his head when he was tired, exposing the soft pulse point of his neck. Another target. You're staring, he said suddenly. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply placed the glass within his reach. I am waiting for your next command, Alpha. That is what I am here for, isn't it? Kaelin finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, making the icy blue seem even more piercing. He leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. Most of the girls who come here are looking for a way out of the room within 5 minutes. You look like you're calculating the distance between us. I am a servant of the Obsidian Palace, I lied, my voice is smooth as the silk I wore. Distance is relative when one has duties to perform. He let out a short, dark laugh that didn't reach his eyes. You speak like a scholar and move like a cat. Vane found a strange one in you. He took a long drink of the wine. For a second, I imagined what would happen if I had poisoned it today. I could see the foam at his lips, the light fading from his eyes. But no. My orders were clear. A quick death was too good for him. My pack wanted him to suffer. They wanted a public execution, a statement to all the packs that the Wolf King was mortal. But the more I served him, the more I realized that Kaelin wasn't just a brute. He was a machine. He ate only what he needed to survive. He slept barely 4 hours a night. He was obsessed with the safety of his boarders. I watched him eat the meal I brought him that evening, roasted stag and bitter greens. I stood by the hearth, my hands folded, watching his every move. Why do you hate me so much, Lara? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been so careful to keep my face neutral, so careful to bury my scent. Did he know? I don't know what you mean, Alpha, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Kaelin stood up, his massive frame blocking out the light from the fire. He walked toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. I felt my wolf rising, scratching at my skin, wanting to fight or flee. I forced her back down. He stopped inches away from me. He was so tall I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eye. The scent of him, cedarwood, rain, and something sharp like ozone, filled my senses. I can smell it, he whispered, leaning down until his lips were near my ear. It's not fear. It's not lust. It's a cold, sharp bitterness. It's the smell of a blade being sharpened in the dark. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was electric, a searing heat that made my skin crawl and my blood boil at the same time. I wanted to bite his hand off. I wanted to scream. "Do you want to kill me, Lara?" he asked, his voice almost gentle. I looked him dead in the eye, my rage finally bubbling to the surface, though I kept my body still. "Every person in this palace wants something from you, Alpha. Some want power. Some want mercy. Perhaps I just want to see if the great king is as unbreakable as the stories say." He stared at me for a long time, his thumb still resting on my jaw. The tension in the room was so thick I could almost taste it. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for me to beg or to strike. But I did neither. I simply stood my ground, a shadow in his chamber, a silent promise of his downfall. Finally, he pulled his hand away. He looked at me with a strange expression. Something that looked almost like respect, though it was quickly masked by his usual coldness. "Get out," he said, turning back to his desk. "And bring more wine. My thirst is growing." I bowed low, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I walked out of the room, I didn't feel relieved. I felt empowered. He knew I was dangerous, yet he kept me close. He was arrogant. He thought he could control me. I walked down the dark corridor toward the kitchens, my mind already spinning with the new information I had gained. He had an old wound. He was sleep-deprived. And most importantly, he was curious about me. Curiosity is a fatal flaw in a predator. I would serve him his wine. I would serve him his food. I would be the most loyal, most silent servant he had ever known. And when he finally felt safe enough to turn his back on me without a second thought, I would show him exactly how sharp my bitterness could be. The Wolf King thought he was the only hunter in this palace. He was wrong. The vial felt like a lead weight in my palm. It was filled with a concentrated extract of wolfsbane, a slow-acting, paralyzing toxin that wouldn't kill a king instantly, but would leave him helpless and unable to shift while my pack breached the walls. Tonight was the night. The palace was quiet, draped in the heavy silence that followed one of Kaelin's outbursts. Earlier that day, he had executed a traitor in the courtyard, and the scent of iron and ozone still hung in the rafters. The air was thick with the restless energy of a pack that knew its leader was on edge. I moved through the private cellar, my black silk uniform blending into the shadows. I reached for the vintage Kaelin favored most, a heavy, dark red wine from the southern valleys. My fingers were cold, my breath shallow. I wasn't afraid of dying, I was afraid of failing. I uncorked the bottle with practiced silence. I tilted the vial. The clear liquid dripped into the dark wine, disappearing instantly. 1 drop. 2. 3. You have a steady hand for someone who spends her days serving others. The voice didn't come from the doorway. It came from the darkness directly behind me. I froze. I didn't drop the bottle. I didn't gasp. I simply stood there, the vial hidden in the curve of my palm, as the heat of a massive body pressed against my back. Kaelin was so close I could feel the vibration of his breathing against my spine. He hadn't made a sound. Not a footstep. Not a rustle of fabric. "Alpha," I said, my voice a flat, cold line. "I didn't hear you enter." "I didn't enter," he whispered, his lips so close to my ear that his breath stirred my hair. "I was already here. Watching." He reached around me, his large, scarred hand covering mine on the neck of the wine bottle. His skin was burning, a stark contrast to my icy fingers. He didn't pull the bottle away. He just held it with me, his chest rising and falling against my shoulder blades. "It's a rare vintage," he murmured. "Strong. Bitter. Much like you, Lara." I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, not with fear, but with the raw, visceral urge to turn and drive the vial into his eye. I was a hair's breadth away from being caught. If he looked at my other hand, he would see the evidence. "The Alpha deserves only the best," I replied, my jaw tight. Kalen didn't move. He leaned in further, his nose brushing against the pulse point of my neck. I felt a shiver of pure, unadulterated rage, and something else, something terrifying that made my wolf stir in the depths of my soul. "Your scent is changing," he said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble. "In the kitchen, you smelled like lye and soot. Now, you smell like mountain air. And something sharp. Like a storm about to break." He turned me around slowly. I had no choice but to face him. He was shirtless again, the fire of the cellar torches dancing across the muscles of his chest and the jagged scars that marked him as a survivor of 1,000 battles. His icy blue eyes were searching mine, looking for the lie. "What are you hiding, Lara?" He reached out, his fingers brushing the hair away from my face. It was a gesture that should have been affectionate, but in this dark cellar, it felt like a threat. My hand, the one holding the vial, was pressed against the stone table behind me. I slowly slid the glass tube into a crack in the masonry, praying he wouldn't hear the faint clink. "I hide nothing," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I am exactly what you see. A servant who knows her place." "No," Kalen hissed, stepping even closer until there was no air left between us. "You are the only person in this palace who doesn't look at me with fear or greed. You look at me with a hunger I don't recognize. It's almost beautiful." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. For a second, I thought he was going to kiss me. I prepared myself to bite his tongue out. But he stopped. He sniffed the air again, his eyes narrowing. "Finish the wine," he commanded, his voice suddenly cold again. "And bring it to my chamber. I find I am suddenly very thirsty." He backed away into the shadows, his eyes never leaving mine until the darkness swallowed him whole. I stood there for a long time after he was gone, my legs finally beginning to shake. I reached back and retrieved the vial. It was empty. The poison was in the bottle. I had done it. I had survived the encounter, and the king's fate was sealed in a glass of red wine. But as I looked at the bottle, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. I felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest. He hadn't smelled the poison. He had been too distracted by me. I picked up the tray, my face hardening back into a mask of stone. I would bring him the wine. I would watch him drink it. And I would stay until the paralysis took hold, so I could be the last thing he saw before his world went dark. The Alpha King thought he was tasting a rare vintage. He didn't know he was drinking his own funeral. The wine had been delivered, but the king hadn't touched it. Before the first drop could pass his lips, the alarms of the Obsidian Palace screamed through the night. A border skirmish, a brutal, bloody clash with a rogue pack, had broken out at the northern gate. Kalen had dropped the glass, the poisoned vintage staining the white rug like a fresh kill, and shifted into a massive, midnight black wolf before my very eyes. I watched from the balcony as he tore into the night, a shadow of teeth and claws. I should have been happy. The poison was gone, but the battle was a chance for him to fall by another's hand. The alarms of the Obsidian Palace had finally gone silent, but the air inside Kalen's private wing remained thick with the scent of silver and ozone. A border skirmish had broken out at the northern gate, and for 2 hours, I had waited in the shadows, certain that this was the night he would finally fall. But then, the heavy oak doors groaned open. Kalen stumbled in, refusing the help of his guards. He wasn't the invincible king I had seen in the kitchens. He was a man coming apart at the seams. His chest was a mess of torn flesh, 3 deep gashes from a silver-tipped claw weeping dark blood against his pale skin. He was shivering, his powerful frame racked by the poison of the silver. "Lara," he gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. "He didn't order me. He called for me." The guards hesitated at the door, but Kalen waved them away with a trembling hand. "I want no one else. Just her." As the doors clicked shut, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by his pained, shallow breathing. I stood by the bed, my hand instinctively sliding beneath the silk of my uniform. My fingers brushed the cold, familiar hilt of my silver dagger. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his guard completely down. I could do it now. One swift strike to the base of his skull, and my people would be free. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. But as I looked down at him, the sight of his vulnerability hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't snarling or barking orders. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been carrying the weight of 1,000 worlds on his shoulders until his bones were ready to snap. "The kit," he murmured, his eyes half closed. "Please." The word "please" from the mouth of a tyrant was enough to make my hands freeze. I slowly withdrew my hand from my blade. My rage, which had been a roaring fire for years, suddenly felt like damp ash. I moved with a softness I didn't know I possessed. I knelt between his knees, setting the basin of warm water down. My hands were steady as I dipped a clean cloth into the water, but my mind was a storm. I began to wipe away the grime and blood from his ribs, my movements careful and light. Kalen hissed as the warmth hit his wounds, his muscles jumping under my touch. Instinctively, I placed my free hand on his shoulder to steady him. The moment our skin met, the room seemed to disappear. A jolt of pure, white-hot energy slammed into me, traveling from his skin into my very soul. It wasn't a shock, it was a connection. My wolf, usually so silent and full of hate, let out a soft, mourning sound. I felt a wave of his pain, not just the physical sting of the silver, but a deep, crushing loneliness that made my own chest ache. I looked up, and for the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man who was bleeding for his people, just as I was willing to bleed for mine. "You're shivering," I whispered, my voice thick with a compassion that terrified me. I reached for the needle and silk thread, my fingers moving with a gentle grace. I began to stitch the largest wound, my face inches from his chest. Kalen didn't move. He watched me, his icy blue eyes softened by the haze of pain. He didn't look at me like a servant. He looked at me like I was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. "Why are your hands so gentle, Lara?" he breathed. His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in my chest, making my breath hitch. "After everything I've done, after the fear I've sowed, why do you care?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I concentrated on the stitches, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. I hated him for being a king, but in this moment, I loved the soul that was struggling beneath the scars. My empathy was a traitor, turning my mission into a memory. When the last stitch was tied, I didn't pull away. I lingered there, my hand resting over his heart. I could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his life beneath my palm. It was a rhythm I should have wanted to stop, but all I wanted was to keep it beating. Kalen reached up, his large, calloused hand covering mine. He didn't pull me away. He pressed my palm harder against his chest, as if he wanted to pull my warmth into his very blood. "Stay," he whispered, his forehead leaning against mine. "Just for tonight. Don't leave me to the silence." I looked at the silhouette of my dagger beneath my silk dress, then back at his tired, pleading eyes. I knew then that I had lost. I hadn't executed the king. I had fallen for the man. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied, my voice a vow I knew would change everything. I sat beside him on the bed, his head eventually finding my shoulder as the exhaustion took him. I stayed awake long after his breathing leveled out, watching the moonlight dance over his scars. I was an assassin who had forgotten how to kill, and as I watched the man I was supposed to hate sleep peacefully in my arms, I realized the most dangerous thing in this palace wasn't his temper. It was the love I was starting to feel for my enemy. The following morning, the atmosphere in the private wing had shifted. The cold, sharp tension of the previous nights had been replaced by something softer, something far more dangerous, affection. Kalen was no longer just a patient, and I was no longer just a shadow. As his strength returned, so did a new kind of hunger in his eyes. It wasn't the hunger of a predator for its prey, but the yearning of a man who had finally seen a light in the dark. I was polishing the silver in his study when I felt his presence. He didn't stay behind his desk. He walked toward me, his movements fluid and powerful, the scars on his chest hidden beneath a soft linen shirt I had prepared for him. "Leave that," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. "It is my duty, Alpha," I replied, my heart skipping a beat. I didn't look up, focusing intensely on the silver tray. I had to resist him. I had to remember the note. I had to remember the dagger. Kalen reached out, his hand gently covering mine, stopping the cloth. His skin was warm, and the contact felt like a spark hitting dry kindling. "I have 1,000 servants who can polish silver, Lara. I have only one who looks at me the way you do." He gently took the tray from my hands and set it aside. I tried to step back, to regain the safe distance of a servant, but he followed, pinning me gently between his towering frame and the heavy oak table. "Alpha, this is not proper," I whispered, my breath hitching as he leaned down. "The crown is heavy, Lara," he murmured, his blue eyes searching mine with a terrifying softness. "For years, I have lived for the pack, for the war, for the blood. But when I look at you, I feel like I can finally breathe." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my lower lip. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to scream at him that I was a lie, that I was a weapon sent to end him. But my body betrayed me. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut for a brief, agonizing second. "You shouldn't, you don't know me," I managed to say, my voice trembling with a mix of love and guilt. "I know enough," Kalen whispered. He leaned in, his nose brushing against mine. The scent of him, cedar, rain, and pure, masculine warmth, wrapped around me like a blanket. "I know you stayed when others fled. I know your hands healed me when you could have let me die. I know that I want you by my side, not as a servant, but as something more." He was pursuing me with the same relentless focus he used to win wars. He began to leave small tokens of his affection, a rare mountain flower on my tray, a silken shawl to keep me warm in the drafty corridors, a seat at his side during his private meals. Every gesture was a blow to my resolve. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, he found me on the balcony. He didn't speak. He simply stood behind me, wrapping his cloak around both of our shoulders, pulling me back against his chest. "Look at the moon, Lara," he said, his chin resting on the top of my head. "They say the moon sees all our secrets. But tonight, I have no secrets from you. I am yours, if you will have me." I stood frozen in his arms. The moon. The 3-night warning. The crescent shadows. They were all there, hovering in the dark, waiting to destroy this fragile, beautiful thing we were building. I turned in his arms, placing my hands on his chest to create a small, desperate space between us. "Kalen, please. I am just a maid. You are the Alpha King. This can only end in pain." "Let it," he growled softly, his eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce possessiveness. He cupped my face in his hands, his gaze locking onto mine. "I have fought every pack in the north and won. Do you think I am afraid of a little pain? I would burn this palace to the ground to keep you." He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine, a silent question. For a heartbeat, I almost gave in. I almost told him everything. I almost let the assassin die so the woman could live. But at the last second, I turned my head. His kiss landed on my cheek, warm and lingering. I need time, I whispered, my voice breaking. Please, Alpha. Just time. Kalen sighed, a sound of frustration mixed with deep tenderness. He kissed my forehead and stepped back, giving me the air I needed, though his eyes never left mine. I will give you time, Lara. But know this, I am a wolf. Once I have found my mate, I do not let go. I watched him walk away, his silhouette strong and proud against the starlight. I stood alone on the balcony, the cold wind biting at my skin. He was falling in love with his murderer. And I was falling in love with my victim. The clock was still ticking. 2 nights left. And as I touched my cheek where he had kissed me, I knew that the hardest part of my mission wasn't going to be the killing. It was going to be the goodbye. The final night had arrived. The moon hung in the sky like a silver executioner's blade. I couldn't delay any longer. The crescent shadows were waiting in the treeline, expecting a signal that would never come. I stood in the center of Kalen's darkened bedchamber, my fingers trembling as I reached for the silver dagger hidden beneath my black silk. My heart was a lead weight. Every touch we had shared, every soft word he had whispered, felt like a hot brand against my skin. I loved him. But the debt of my pack was a chain I couldn't break. I walked toward the bed, my footsteps silent. Kalen lay there, his face peaceful in the moonlight. He looked like the man who had promised to burn the world for me, not the tyrant I had been sent to kill. I drew the blade. The silver glinted, a cold promise of blood. I stood over him, my shadow falling across his chest. I raised the knife, my muscles coiling. For the pack, I told myself. For my life. But my hand stopped in mid-air. I looked at the scar on his chest, the one I had stitched. I couldn't do it. My eyes filled with tears, blurring my vision. Do it. The voice was a low, terrifying growl that sliced through the silence. Before I could gasp, Kalen's hand shot up. He didn't grab my wrist, he slammed his palm into my chest, throwing me backward. I hit the stone wall with a bone-jarring thud, the dagger clattering across the floor. Kalen surged out of bed, his eyes burning a radioactive amber. The eyes of an alpha pushed past the point of no return. He stalked toward me, his movements primal. He kicked the dagger away and hauled me up by the collar until my toes barely touched the ground. Was it all a lie, Lara? He roared, his face inches from mine. The sheer volume made the windows rattle. The healing? The touches? Was it all just to get close enough to put a hole in my heart? Kalen, please, I sobbed, my hands clutching his iron-grip wrists. I couldn't do it. I stopped. His fury faltered for a heartbeat, replaced by a raw, bleeding curiosity. He slammed me back against the wall, but he didn't let go. His voice dropped to a pained, jagged whisper. Who sent you? He demanded, his eyes searching mine with a desperate hunger for the truth. Who owns you so completely that you would throw away what we found in the dark? Tell me who put that blade in your hand. Tell me who sent a viper into my bed. I can't, I choked out, the tears streaming down my face. If I tell you, they'll kill me. They'll kill everyone. I am the alpha of the Obsidian Palace. Kalen bellowed, his grip tightening. No one strikes at me and survives. Was it the Crescent Shadows? Was it the Southern Pack? Give me a name, Lara. Give me a reason to believe you are anything more than a common murderer. He shook me, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. I could feel his hot breath, his heartbeat racing against my own. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to understand how the woman who held him while he bled could also be the one holding the knife. Was any of it real? He whispered, his voice breaking with a vulnerability that hurt more than his anger. When you sat by my side, when you touched me, was that the assassin, or was that the woman I thought I knew? It was me, I whispered, my heart breaking. It was always me. That's why I couldn't strike. I love you, Kaelin. Kaelin let out a sound. A mix of a sob and a snarl. He shoved me away, his face a mask of agony. He couldn't look at me. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. Guards, he roared, his voice echoing through the halls. The doors burst open. Take her, he commanded, his back turned to me. Throw her in the black dungeon. Chain her with cold iron. I want her to rot in the dark until she finds the courage to tell me who sent her to murder me. Kaelin, no. Listen to me. I screamed as the guards seized my arms. He didn't turn around. He stood by the window, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, staring at the moon that had betrayed us both. I was dragged down the winding stairs, away from the warmth and into the damp, freezing bowels of the palace. The heavy iron door of the dungeon slammed shut. I was chained to the cold stone wall, the iron burning my skin. In the silence of the dark, I realized the most terrifying thing of all. He wasn't just my judge. He was a man who felt every ounce of the love I had confessed, but now, that love was twisted into a weapon. And as I sat in the dirt, I knew he wouldn't stop until he burned the truth out of me. 3 days of silence. 3 days of the damp, suffocating dark pressing against my skin. The iron chains around my wrists felt heavier with every passing hour, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had carried in my heart. In the Obsidian Palace, there were no judges, no trials. There was only Kaelin's word, and right now, his word was as cold as the stone floor. The heavy iron bolts shrieked as they were pulled back. The door swung open, and Kaelin stepped in, carrying a single torch that cast a violent, flickering orange light across the cell. He didn't look like a man who had slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his presence was so suffocating that the air seemed to vanish from the room. He didn't sit. He stood over me, the heat from the torch radiating against my face. The guards are waiting for my word, Elara, he said, his voice a jagged, low growl that vibrated through the floor. They want to see the assassin bleed. I've kept them at bay for 3 days, but my patience has reached its end. Tell me everything. No more lies. No more silence. How did you get in, and who sent the blade? I looked up at him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline surged through my veins, making my hands shake despite the iron. I waited, I whispered, my voice raspy and raw. I waited for the recruitment cycle. When your palace opened its gates for new servants, I was there, hidden among the hundreds of desperate faces. I had forged papers, a fake history, and a heart full of venom. I wasn't chosen by luck, Kaelin. I was the best they had. I made sure I was the one you would notice. Kaelin's eyes flared with a sudden, sharp pain. Who are they? The Crescent Shadows, I spat the name out like a curse. They found me when I was a child in the ruins of a border war. They didn't raise me, they forged me. They told me you were a tyrant, a monster who feasted on the suffering of my people. They promised me that your death would bring peace. For 15 years, I breathed only to see your blood on the floor. Kaelin stepped closer, his shadow looming over me like a mountain. He grabbed the front of my torn uniform, hauling me up until my face was inches from his. The scent of him, smoke and cedar, hit me with the force of a physical blow. And you were there, he hissed, his amber eyes searching mine with a terrifying intensity. You were in my room. You had the silver. Why is my heart still beating, Elara? Why didn't you finish it? Because I was wrong. I screamed, the words exploding out of me in a rush of tears and adrenaline. I came here to kill a monster, but I found a man who bleeds for his people. I found a man who looks at me like I'm more than a shadow. I couldn't strike because every time I looked at you, I saw the life I never got to have. I love you, Kaelin. And that is the worst betrayal of all. Kaelin froze. His grip on my collar tightened for a second, then slowly, his fingers began to tremble. The fury was still there, a roaring fire in his eyes, but beneath it was a devastating, raw grief. He looked at me not as a king looks at a prisoner, but as a man looks at the person who just shattered his world. You came here to destroy me, he whispered, his voice breaking. And you did. Not with the blade, but with the lie. He shoved me back against the wall, the chains rattling violently in the silence. He turned his back to me, his shoulders heaving as he struggled to maintain control over his wolf. The air in the cell was thick with the scent of ozone and heartbreak. The guards will remain at the door, he said, his voice flat and dead, though I could hear the tremor in it. You've given me the who and the how. But the truth doesn't change the fact that you are a weapon sent to end my life. He walked toward the door, the torchlight fading as he moved. Kaelin. I called out, my voice a desperate plea in the dark. He paused, his hand on the heavy iron latch. He didn't turn around. I am the alpha of this palace, Elara. And as the alpha, I should kill you. But as a man, as the man who loved you, I can't even look at you. The door slammed shut, and the bolts hissed into place. I was back in the dark, my heart racing, the adrenaline slowly turning into a cold, hollow ache. I had told him the truth, and now I was waiting for the only thing left, my sentence. The hours following my confession were the longest of my life. I expected the executioner. I expected the roar of an alpha's vengeance. Instead, I got silence. A silence so profound it felt like the palace itself was holding its breath, waiting for Kaelin's next move. The guards at my door had been doubled. I could hear their hushed whispers, the metallic clink of their armor as they paced. They didn't see me as the maid who healed their king anymore. They saw a ghost, a shadow that had almost snatched the life from the heart of their kingdom. I sat in the corner of my cell, my back against the damp stone, staring at the thin sliver of moonlight that managed to pierce the high, barred window. I had laid my soul bare, but the truth hadn't set me free. It had only built a wall between us that no apology could tear down. The fallout began with the sound of distant shouts and the frantic ringing of the palace bells. The door to the dungeon didn't just open, it was thrown wide. Kaelin returned, but he wasn't alone. Two of his highest-ranking generals stood behind him, their faces grim and set for war. Kaelin walked to the center of the cell, his eyes fixed on me with a terrifying, clinical focus. Your people aren't waiting for the moon to rise, he said, his voice like cracking ice. The crescent shadows have been spotted in the lower valley. They know you've failed, Elara. And they're not coming to rescue you. They're coming to finish what you started, and to burn everything you touched along the way. He stepped closer, the adrenaline radiating off him in waves. He didn't touch me this time. He looked at me as if I were a map he was trying to decipher. You said you love me, he whispered, the words sounding foreign and bitter in the cold air. If that wasn't just another layer of the lie, you will tell my generals every signal, every code, and every hidden path your pack uses. You will give me the tactical advantage I need to bury them before they reach my gates. I've already told you everything I know, Kaelin, I replied, my voice shaking. Not everything, he snapped, his eyes flashing amber. I need the names of the insiders. I need to know who else in my court is a sleeper. If I go to war tonight, I won't have my back turned to another dagger. One of the generals stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt. Alpha, we are wasting time. We should put her on the battlements. Let them see their failed assassin before we take her head. It might draw them out. Kaelin's jaw tightened so hard I thought it might shatter. He didn't look at the general. He kept his gaze locked on mine. For a heartbeat, the mask of the king slipped, and I saw the agonizing conflict underneath. He wanted to hate me. He needed to hate me. But the man who had held me in the study was still fighting for air. No, Kaelin said, his voice low and absolute. She stays here. Chained. If a single arrow hits my walls, she is the first to die. But until then, she is my prisoner, and mine alone. He turned to his generals, his command echoing through the dungeon. Prepare the wolves. Seal the north gate. If they want a war, the Obsidian Palace will give them a massacre. As they turned to leave, Kaelin paused at the threshold. He didn't look back, but his voice reached me, hollow and broken. You wanted to know the price of your truth, Elara? Look around you. The world is going to burn because I couldn't bring myself to kill a girl who came to murder me. The door slammed shut, and the sounds of preparation for war began to thunder through the floors above. I was left in the dark once more, the fallout of my love and my lies finally catching up to us. The crescent shadows were coming, and I was the one who had led them to his door. The cell door didn't just open, it was ripped aside. 2 guards seized my arms, dragging me upward through the dark, winding corridors of the palace. The air changed from the smell of damp earth to the sharp scent of cold steel and frantic preparation. The palace was no longer a home, it was a fortress bracing for a slaughter. I was thrust into the war room. Maps were sprawled across the heavy oak table, weighted down by daggers and stones. Kaelin stood at the head, his back to me, his shoulders tensed like a bowstring about to snap. Tell them, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. He didn't turn around. I stepped toward the table, the eyes of the generals burning into me like brands. I didn't flinch. I reached out and traced the jagged line of the northern pass. They won't come through the main gates, I began, my voice gaining strength as the adrenaline took hold. That's a feint. The crescent shadows use a tactic called the wolf's maw. They will send a small, loud force to the front to draw your heavy hitters out. But their true elite, the ones I trained with, will use the old drainage tunnels beneath the western cliff. They are narrow, slippery, and you can only fit 2 men abreast. If you station your archers at the exit, you can pick them off like rats in a pipe. The generals whispered among themselves, their skepticism turning into grim calculation. For the next hour, I laid it all bare. I told them their signals, the owl cry that meant advance, the 3 whistles that meant retreat. I showed them how to recognize a shadow's stance before they even drew their blade. I gave Kaelin every secret I had been forged to keep. As the generals hurried out to reposition the troops, the room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Kaelin finally turned. The amber in his eyes hadn't faded, he looked like a man standing on the edge of a precipice. Is that all of it? He asked, stepping closer. I looked toward the guards at the door, then stepped into his space, leaning in until my lips were inches from his ear. I could smell the wood smoke and the raw, metallic scent of his armor. Kaelin, listen to me, I whispered, my heart racing. There is an insider. Someone in your army, someone high enough to know your rotations, has been feeding the shadows information for months. It's how I knew exactly when the guard shifts changed the night I entered your room. Kaelin stiffened, his breath hitching. Who? I don't know, I said, the frustration blooming in my chest. In the shadows, information is compartmentalized. I was only told that a friend of the moon sat at your table. You cannot trust anyone tonight, Kaelin. Not even the men who swear they would die for you. Watch your back, because the deadliest blade isn't the one in the dark. It's the one standing right behind you. Kaelin pulled back, his gaze searching mine. For a second, the suspicion flickered, but then he saw the sheer terror in my eyes, not for my life, but for his. He reached out, his gloved hand gripping the back of my neck, pulling my forehead against his. If you are lying to sow discord among my men, he warned, his voice breaking. I'm not, I breathed. Please. Just, survive. He let go of me abruptly, his expression hardening back into the mask of the Alpha King. Guards. Take her to the high tower. Lock the door from the outside. If the tunnels are empty and this was a trap to thin my gates, kill her immediately. As I was led away, I looked back one last time. Kalen was looking at his inner circle of soldiers with a new, haunting doubt in his eyes. I had given him the keys to win the war, but I had also given him a seed of paranoia that would either save his life or destroy his kingdom from the inside out. The first howl of the enemy echoed from the cliffs. The war had begun. The night air was shattered by the sound of the wolf's maw signal, 3 long, low whistles echoing from the western cliffs. The crescent shadows thought they were slipping into a trap-free palace, but Kalen was no longer the prey. Thanks to the secrets I had spilled, he was the predator. The drainage tunnels, which were supposed to be their secret passage, became a tomb. As the first wave of assassins emerged, Kalen's archers unleashed a rain of fire from the ridges. The screams of my former pack rose into the night, but the real battle was happening in the valley below. Kalen stood at the front of his army, his golden wolf form a beacon of fury. The ambush was perfect. The Obsidian army crashed into the Shadow's main force with the weight of a mountain. But just as victory seemed certain, the warning I had whispered in the dark came true in the most brutal way. Ares, one of Kalen's elite guards, a man who had stood at his shoulder for years, suddenly veered his horse away from the formation. With a roar of betrayal, he turned his blade not on the enemy, but on the Alpha's flank. "The Shadows take you," Ares bellowed, his sword aimed directly at Kalen's heart. My heart stopped as I watched from the tower window. It was the moment the enemy had prayed for, the knife from within. But Kalen didn't flinch. He had been waiting for the shadow to move. He shifted mid-leap, his human form spinning with terrifying speed. His broadsword met Ares's steel with a spark that lit up the blood-soaked earth. "Elara told me to watch for a viper," Kalen's voice carried over the din of war, cold and absolute. "I didn't want to believe it was you, Ares. But a traitor's scent is impossible to hide." The duel was short. Kalen fought with the strength of a king who had been pushed past the point of mercy. With one final, devastating swing, he disarmed the traitor and sent him crashing into the dirt. The sight of their insider failing broke the last of the Crescent Shadow's spirit. The Obsidian army, fueled by the rage of the betrayal, completely overpowered the enemy. It wasn't just a victory, it was a total destruction. By the time the sun began to bleed over the horizon, the battlefield was silent, littered with the banners of a fallen pack. Kalen didn't stop at his borders. He led his wolves into the heart of the Crescent Shadow's territory, capturing their strongholds and burning their seats of power. Their lands, their mines, and their people were now under the rule of the Obsidian Palace. The pack that had raised me to be a tool was wiped from the map. As the dust settled, Kalen stood on the highest peak of the newly conquered land. He looked back toward the palace, toward the high tower where I was still locked away. He had won the war, he had crushed the traitor, and he had claimed a kingdom. But as he looked at his blood-stained hands, the victory felt jagged. He had saved his people, but he still had to decide what to do with the woman who had given him the keys to his kingdom, and the scars on his heart. The bells of the Obsidian Palace didn't just ring, they roared. Kalen had returned, not just as a survivor of an ambush, but as the absolute conqueror of the Crescent Shadows. Their lands were now his. Their secrets were laid bare. And their only remaining weapon, Himi, was currently trembling on the floor of his private chambers. The door had been locked from the outside by his elite guard, but it was the presence of the man standing by the hearth that made the air feel like lead. Kalen still wore his leather riding gear, the scent of the battlefield, of iron and victory, clinging to him like a second skin. "Get up," he commanded. I scrambled to my feet, my legs feeling like water. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than any chain. "I won't tell you again, Elara. Look at me." I raised my eyes, and the sheer intensity of his gaze nearly sent me back to my knees. His eyes weren't just amber. They were glowing with the raw, unchecked power of a king who had just tasted blood. "You gave me the traitor," he said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. You gave me the tunnels. And for that, my kingdom owes you its life. But the man you slept beside, the man you healed, he is still waiting for the truth. The dam broke. The days of terror, the adrenaline of the war, and the crushing guilt of my existence poured out of me. I collapsed toward him, my voice a jagged, desperate sob. I am a monster, Kaelin. I cried, the tears burning my cheeks. They took me when I was a child. They broke me until I was nothing but a blade. They told me you were a tyrant who fed on the weak. I was trained for 15 years to hate you, to find the exact spot in your chest where your heart beats and end it. I reached out, clutching at the front of his tunic, my fingers shaking. But I couldn't do it. From the first moment you looked at me, the lies started to rot. I stayed because I wanted to be near the light you carried. I betrayed my own blood to save you because I love you more than I love my own life. Please, have mercy. I have nothing left. No pack, no family, only you. Kaelin didn't pull away, but he didn't embrace me either. He stood like a statue of cold stone as I wept against his chest, my confession echoing off the high ceilings. Mercy, he whispered, the words sounding like a curse. You want mercy for bringing a war to my doorstep? For living a lie in my very bed? He grabbed my wrists, his grip firm and unyielding. He didn't lead me to the door. Instead, he pulled me toward a small, heavy oak door at the back of his chambers, a room meant for his most private meditations. He thrust me inside. My heart stopped when I heard the sound, the heavy, metallic clink of a cold iron chain bolted to the floor. You said you are mine, Elara, he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath hot against my skin. And I believe you. But a weapon as dangerous as you cannot be left to wander. He didn't call the guards. He knelt, his own hands snapping the iron cuff around my ankle. The cold of the metal bit into my skin, a permanent reminder of my new reality. You will stay here, he declared, standing tall and looking down at me with a mixture of possessive fury and agonizing pain. In my rooms. Under my eyes. You will not leave, you will not see the sun unless I allow it, and you will tell me every name and every secret you still hold. You wanted to be mine? Now, you are. Completely. He walked out, the heavy door thudding shut. The click of the lock was final. I was no longer an assassin, and I was no longer a maid. I was the Alpha's secret, chained in the heart of his power, waiting to see if his love would ever outweigh his need for revenge. The heavy oak door to the Alpha's private chambers creaked open, admitting the cold morning air and the scent of the man who now owned my very breath. Kaelin had changed into the black and gold silk of a ruling king, but the exhaustion in his eyes told me the war was still being fought in his head. I didn't wait for him to speak. I threw myself at his feet, my forehead touching the cool wood of the floor. The iron chain rattled, a haunting, metallic reminder of my betrayal. Kaelin, please, I whispered, my voice thick with the remnants of 1,000 tears. Don't just keep me as a trophy of your victory. Don't let me rot in this silence. Give me a way to serve. Give me a way to prove that the woman who saved you is the only woman who remains. I will do anything. I will scrub the floors of the barracks, I will tend the horses, I will walk into the fire, just let me show you my heart is true. Kaelin stood over me for a long time, his shadow stretching across the room like a dark shroud. I heard him sigh, a sound of profound weight. You want a job, Elara? He asked, his voice low and calculating. You want to prove your character? Very well. My kingdom has doubled overnight. I have hundreds of Crescent Shadow refugees who need to be integrated, and thousands who need to be watched. You know their language, their customs, and their lies. He knelt down, gripping my chin and forcing me to look at him. His eyes were searching mine, looking for the flicker of the assassin. You will work in the administrative wing, he declared. You will categorize the prisoners, translate the old scrolls of the Northern Pass, and help my ministers identify the dangerous radicals. But you will not do it alone. He signaled toward the door. Two of his most elite black claw guards stepped inside. They were men who had lost brothers in the ambush. Men who looked at me with a hatred so pure it made my skin crawl. From the moment the sun rises until it sets, you will be under their constant supervision, Kaelin hissed. If you take a step toward a window you aren't supposed to be near, if you whisper a word that isn't on a ledger, they have my permission to end you on the spot. He stood up, his expression hardening. This is not a pardon, Elara. This is a test. You will work until your fingers bleed to build the kingdom you tried to destroy. And at night, you will return here, to this room and to this chain. I will see if the love you claim can survive the reality of your penance. He turned to the guards. Take her to the archives. If she breathes wrong, alert me. As the guards hauled me up and led me from the room, I looked back at Kaelin. He was watching me go, his hand clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was giving me a chance to stay, but he was also building a cage made of duty and eyes. I had a job, I had a purpose, but I was walking a tightrope over a pit of wolves. The archives were a labyrinth of dust, old parchment, and the silent, judging eyes of the black claw guards. For 18 hours a day, I sat at a scarred wooden desk, translating the intricate, coded ledgers of the crescent shadows. My fingers were permanently stained with ink, and my back ached from the weight of the tasks Kaelin's ministers piled upon me, tasks meant to break a lesser woman. But I didn't break. I worked with a ferocity that stunned even the most cynical of the palace staff. While the other scribes took breaks, I stayed. While the guards whispered insults about my heritage, I kept my head down and my pen moving. I didn't just translate the names of prisoners, I provided context on their ranks, their family loyalties, and which ones could be flipped to Kaelin's side. I gave the Obsidian Palace the roadmap to peace that only an insider could provide. One afternoon, a high minister threw a stack of water-damaged maps on my desk. The western supply lines are a mess of shadow dialect, he spat. The Alpha needs these reconciled by dawn, or our patrols go in blind. It was a task that should have taken 3 days. I finished it by midnight. I didn't notice Kaelin standing in the doorway of the archives until the flicker of his torch caught the edge of my vision. The guards straightened immediately, but I didn't stop my work until the final seal was dried. I stood up, my legs trembling with exhaustion, and presented the maps to him. My eyes were bloodshot, and my face was pale, but my gaze was steady. The supply lines are secured, Alpha, I said, my voice raspy from hours of silence. I've marked the ambush points their stragglers might still be using. Your men will be safe. Kaelin took the maps, his eyes scanning the meticulous detail of my work. He looked at the ink-stained calluses on my hands, then at the guards who had been watching me like hawks for a week. She hasn't spoken to a soul? Kaelin asked the guards. Not a word that wasn't about the ledgers, Alpha, one guard admitted, his voice sounding begrudgingly respectful. She works harder than the entire ministry combined. Kaelin looked back at me, and for a fleeting second, the coldness in his eyes thawed into something like awe. He saw the circles under my eyes and the way I refused to falter despite the chains of my position. I wasn't just doing a job, I was building a monument to my loyalty, brick by painstaking brick. You've done more for this kingdom in a week than most do in a lifetime, Elara, he said, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble. I am not doing it for the kingdom, I replied softly, stepping just an inch closer. I am doing it so that when you look at me, you don't see the girl with the silver dagger. You see the woman who would burn the world to keep your crown secure. Kaelin didn't answer, but as he turned to leave, he signaled the guards to give me a moment of peace. I had survived the first test. I had shown them that a weapon, when turned toward the light, could become a shield. The ink on my hands would eventually wash away, but the loyalty I was carving into the heart of the palace was permanent. 1 year. For seasons of ink-stained fingers, frozen winter mornings in the archives, and the relentless heat of the forge. A year ago, I was an assassin caught in the throat of the enemy. Today, I was the most efficient shadow in the Obsidian Palace. I didn't ask for mercy anymore. I didn't beg for his attention. Instead, I gave Kalen the only thing an alpha truly values: absolute, unwavering results. Under the constant, heavy gaze of the Black Claw guards, I dismantled the remnants of the Crescent Shadow's underground networks. I translated every coded message and identified every hidden supply cache. I worked until my eyes burned and my hands cramped, becoming the silent architect of Kalen's new empire. I lived in the small room adjacent to his chambers. The iron chain had been removed months ago, but I never once stepped through the door without a direct summons. Kalen remained a mountain of ice. Our interactions were stripped of all emotion, reduced to short, clipped reports on border security and resource allocation. There were no soft glances. If he had forgiven me for the dagger I once held, he kept that forgiveness buried deep beneath his royal armor. Tonight, I stood before his desk, presenting the final audit of the annexed northern mines. I kept my head bowed as I set the heavy ledger down. The production is up 30%, Alpha, I said, my voice low and steady. The laborers are integrated. The territory is stable. Kalen took the ledger, his eyes scanning the columns of my perfect calligraphy. The silence in the room was heavy, filled only with the crackle of the hearth. He didn't look up for a long time. I stood perfectly still, my hands folded, waiting for his dismissal. You have been in the cold for a year, Kalen finally said, his voice a neutral rasp. You have worked through the night while the rest of the palace slept. You haven't faltered once. I didn't speak. I didn't offer an excuse or a plea. I simply waited. Kalen stood up and walked to a small cabinet, pulling out a heavy iron key. He set it on the desk between us with a definitive clack. The guards are being reassigned, Elara. You are no longer under supervision. You have the run of the palace. Your work has earned you a permanent place in the administrative wing. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a smile. He looked at me with the cold, calculating eye of a king who had tested a tool and found it to be unbreakable. The northern borders are secure because of the maps you reconstructed. You have proven where your loyalty lies. He turned back to his maps, dismissing me without another word. I took the key, it was cold and heavy in my palm. I hadn't won his heart back, but I had earned something far more valuable in his world. The absolute certainty that I was his most loyal asset. I bowed low and backed out of the room, leaving the Alpha King alone with the kingdom I had helped him build. 2 years. 2 years since the Alpha King handed me that iron key. 2 years of walking the palace hallways not as a prisoner, and not as a ghost, but as the woman the entire kingdom came to rely on. I was no longer the girl who trembled in the dirt. My hands were still stained with ink, but they moved with a confidence that only time and truth can provide. I had built a new life out of the ruins of my old one. I had served Kalen in the light and in the shadows, helping him turn a war-torn land into a thriving empire. But in all that time, the wall between us had never moved. We were partners in power, but strangers in the heart. Until tonight. The moon was a sliver of silver in the sky when I walked toward his private chambers. I held a leather-bound report on the final integration of the southern packs, the last piece of the puzzle we had been building together. The guards at his door didn't move to stop me, they simply bowed. They had long ago learned that I was the only person allowed to enter without a knock. I stepped inside. The room was warm, lit by a dying fire that cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. Kalen was standing by the balcony, his back to me. He had shed his heavy royal robes, wearing only a loose white shirt and dark trousers. His hair, longer now than when we first met, caught the orange glow of the embers. The report is finished, Alpha, I said. My voice was soft, barely a whisper in the quiet room. He didn't turn around immediately. He leaned his hands on the stone railing, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. Set it on the table, Elara. I did as I was told, but I didn't leave. For 3 years, 1 in the shadows and 2 in the light, I had waited for a moment where we weren't talking about borders or gold or grain. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a familiar, frantic rhythm. "Is there something else?" he asked. He finally turned, and my breath caught in my throat. The coldness that had defined his face for so long was gone, replaced by a weary, heavy softness I hadn't seen since the nights in the dungeon when he was wounded and I was his only hope. I took a step forward, leaving the safety of the desk. "I never said it." Kalen stilled. "Said what?" "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words felt like they were being pulled from the very bottom of my soul. "I am so sorry, Kalen. For the lies. For the dagger. For the moment I looked into your eyes and pretended I didn't see the man you are. I've spent every hour of every day for 3 years trying to earn back the air I breathe in your presence. I needed you to hear it." I looked down at my hands, my vision blurring with sudden, hot tears. "I know I am just your archivist. I know I am your asset. But every map I drew and every scroll I translated was a letter to you. I did it all for you." The silence stretched, but it wasn't the cold silence of the archives. It was a silence that felt like a bridge. I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the floor. Then, I saw his boots in my field of vision. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face before his fingers finally, gently, tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His touch was like fire on my skin. "Do you think I'm blind, Elara?" His voice was a low, rough growl, but it wasn't the growl of a king. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 1,000 days. "Do you think I haven't watched you? Do you think I haven't seen the way you work yourself to exhaustion just to prove you belong here?" He hooked a finger under my chin and forced me to look up. His eyes were a burning, molten amber, swirling with a hunger that made my knees weak. "You haven't been the archivist to me for a long time," he whispered, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "You were a thorn in my side, then you were a weight on my heart. And now..." He traced the line of my jaw with his thumb, his gaze dropping to my lips. For the first time in years, a small, dangerous smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "And now, you're just a woman who talks entirely too much about reports when she should be looking at her king." My heart leaped. "Kalen? I forgave you a long time ago, Elara," he said, his voice dropping to a seductive, gravelly register. "I just wanted to see if you'd keep choosing me when you were free to leave. And you did. Every single day." He leaned down, his breath ghosting over my ear. "You've been very loyal. Very disciplined. But I think I'm tired of the archivist tonight. I think I want the woman who tried to kill me to finally show me how she plans to save me." I let out a shaky laugh, half sob and half smile, and reached up to rest my hands on his chest. I could feel his heart thudding just as fast as mine. "Is that a royal command, Alpha?" "It's a plea," he murmured, his forehead dropping against mine. "The war is over, Elara. Come home." When he finally kissed me, it wasn't the kiss of a stranger or a captor. It was the collision of 2 people who had survived the dark and finally found the sun. It tasted of salt and smoke and years of unspoken longing. In his arms, the chains were finally gone. I wasn't an assassin, and I wasn't a servant. I was the heart of the Obsidian Palace, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the light. And so, the ink dries on the story of Elara and Kalen. What began in the cold darkness of a dungeon, fueled by lies and a silver blade, ended in the warmth of a throne room built on the hardest truth of all, that who we were born to be doesn't have to be who we choose to become. The Obsidian Palace still stands, stronger than ever, not because of the walls Kalen built, but because of the trust Elara earned. Their story reminds us that even the deepest scars can be healed, and even the most broken trust can be rebuilt, brick by painful brick. As we leave the Wolf King and his queen to their peace, let's take a piece of their journey with us. First, loyalty is not a word, it is an action. Elara didn't win her freedom by making promises, she won it by showing up every single day for years, even when it was hard, even when she was tired, and even when no one was watching. True character isn't revealed in the heat of a moment, but in the silence of the long haul. Second, forgiveness is a choice, but trust is a wage. Kaelin showed the strength of a king by letting go of his anger, but he showed the wisdom of a leader by letting Elara earn her way back. Never be afraid to forgive, but never feel guilty for demanding that trust be proven. And finally, your past may have sharpened you, but it doesn't have to define you. Like a blade being reforged, Elara took the skills her enemies gave her and used them to save the man she loved. You are not the mistakes you made or the lies you were told. You are the light you choose to follow today. Thank you for walking this path with us through the Wolf King Dominion. If Elara and Kaelin's story touched your heart, make sure to howl at that like button and subscribe to the pack so you never miss the next legend. Until the moon rises again. Stay loyal, stay strong, and keep building your own kingdom.